And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Tuesday, August 30th. I'm your host for today's program, and we go directly to the Shoshone Bannock Indian Reservation at Fort Hall, Idaho, with correspondent Mark Trahant. Mark Trahant, tell us a little bit about what's on your mind today. Your latest column has to do with just to cap spending, but there's a lot going on out there that we want to talk about today. The appointment of a new top economic advisor in the Obama administration and things like that. But tell us a little bit about your column that came out yesterday about why don't they just cap things?
Sure, Paul. There's this idea out there that if you could just stop spending and use the money that's already there, that wouldn't hurt too bad. And you hear it a lot. Why can't we get by on what's already being spent? And that sounds really good. It sounds really plausible. But the problem is the biggest, fastest part of the budget that's growing is Medicare. And that keeps increasing. People turn 55 or 65 virtually every few minutes. And so that number keeps getting bigger and bigger, and that's automatic spending. So when that money hits, it takes it out of everything else. And that's where Indian programs are.
The age 55 slipped your tongue only because you're very close to that, and that doesn't that seem to be the bar there where people are preserved? Anyone over 55, their benefits will be untouched, and people under 55, they're talking about adjusting?
Well, that's what your representative from the great state of Wisconsin, Paul Ryan, would like people to believe. But I also think it's far more complicated than that, too.
There's people that say he's got guts, maybe.
Well, I think a lot of always been against Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and this is just the latest excuse to go after those programs. And that's what bothers me, is it's not a new thing that they've been against it. They're just using this crisis. The fact is, if you look at across the world, what we pay people in Social Security is really modest. It's not a pension by any stretch of the imagination, yet we also have a very low poverty rate among elders. And the reason is Social Security is one of the few programs that has worked exactly like it's supposed to have worked.
So tweaking seems to be in order for Social Security, and fixing some of the issues for Medicare, Medicaid, having to do with billings and eliminating fraud, seem to be reasonable things to be doing at this point.
Right, and we can attack we know to be the most expensive diseases. For example, diabetes is by far the most expensive disease in America. One of its risk factors is aging. So as people age, if we could get them exercising more, rethinking their diet, doing other things, we could cut the cost of healthcare considerably, which would in turn cut Medicare.
Smoking, drinking
Absolutely.
alcohol in excess, those kinds of things that are actually preventable.
Right. As other countries in the world are doing.
What does the impact of someone like this Alan Kruger, that was appointed now as, or at least picked, he hasn't been confirmed by the Senate, he's got to go through the gauntlet up there. Obama's picked a new economic advisor, actually seems to be very moderate on some things. What do you see in the cards?
Well, and his background is as a labor economist, and labor needs to be a part of the discussion. And in both traditional ways in terms of spurring job development, but also in ways of rethinking the relationship with labor, salaries, and management. Some of the old methods might not be as appropriate today, but there has to be an adult conversation about it. It can't just be, you're going to do this or the highway. Again, the kind of conversation you're having in Wisconsin.
Yeah, well, it's there. In some cases, there's no discussion, and in fact, in the Wisconsin Capitol for a while, there's some of the Democratic legislators couldn't get into their offices to have a discussion.
I want to mention that today, at 2:30 Eastern time, so it's already happened, the Office of Management and Budget briefed tribal leaders on the coming budget issues. Robert Gordon, who's the associate director of the agency, did that. I haven't yet been able to debrief some tribal leaders to find out what they were told, but I'm sure it was a very interesting conversation. They said no press, or I would have eavesdropped.
Sure. Should have eavesdropped anyway somehow, I would have. Is it time for tribal governments to consider looking at taxes, levies, and other things as a base? You go to a lot of reservations, and that seemed to have been the one thing that made Native Americans, well, there's actually a lot of things, lean to the right in terms of Republican philosophy, military service, the sanctity of life. Less government. Our relationship at the tribal level goes to the federal government. Let's knock everything out. And less taxes or no taxes. No property taxes in some cases, no income taxes, which has actually hurt them because the economy, it seems to me, if they were to apply these taxes, might apply to all people within the reservations, tribal members, non-local American Indians, but not tribal members, and then non-natives, in that kind of a
Right.
pecking order. What do you think about that whole feeling?
I think tribes should experiment with all revenue enhancements, fees for services, and they're doing that here. For example, on the Shoshone Bannock Reservation in Idaho, they took over water quality from the state of Idaho and now do it for themselves. And if you build a new house, when they put the septic in, you get an assessment from the tribe to make sure the quality standards are high. And I think that makes total sense. Income taxes, I think, are really interesting because you could start an income tax at, say, $30,000 a year and up, and it would hardly affect any of your tribal members. And those that did make more than 30,000, I'm sure would be willing and even happy to pay that tax. I know I would.
Well, I was willing and happy to pay some kind of a copay on the health insurance when I had a good paying job with another entity a few years back, and they said they weren't involved in taking money because of the treaty obligation thing. But sometimes I think that, like we pointed out before in previous discussions, sometimes that doesn't work in the best interest of tribal governments and for people like me. Now, I'm a member of another nation residing on the Lakudere Ojibwe reservation, and at one point I just says tax exempt. I'm an Indian living on a reservation. The state came in. They established that literally the tribe deals with me like non-Indians, therefore they reached in and taxed my income. Had the local tribe in some way reached out to tax me, it might have, the state of Wisconsin might not have been able to do that to me. I'm a gray area. I'm not a tribal member,
Right.
but I'm not a non-Indian either. So there's a gray area there where there's jurisdictional issues raised. But I think tribes, again, have the blindfolders on in terms of saying, well, we only want to deal with this group of enrolled members, and all other people fall out of that zone of citizenship or within our jurisdiction.
Right.
Do things that Alan Kruger, decisions that Alan Kruger make, do those things, are they percolating down to Indian country in any other way?
One of the problems with economics in Indian country is we don't have really good data. And the one thing the Council of Economic Advisors could do, and this new chairman, is to help with the data problem. For example, you ask anybody, what's the unemployment rate in Indian country? And there's the Bureau of Indian Affairs has one number, the census has one number, each tribe has its own number, and they all use different methodologies. So it's really a problem. And that's one thing where I think the White House Council on Economic Advisors could really help.
Try to really figure out what's going on. Is there a lot of, is there portions of the tribal economy that just aren't visible to the U.S. economy?
I think almost everything is pretty visible nowadays, except for maybe kind of the economy of a religious nature. For example, what medicine men charge on the Navajo reservation, I'm sure nobody knows, and how that filters through the economy. What people pay. I mean, if you just look at artifacts, it could be enormous. People buying baskets for ceremonies, things like that. That'd be an interesting chart.
Power circuits on the reservation. I mean, the IRS has gone
Oh,
after the contest monies off of the reservation so far.
I mean, powwow alone is a fascinating economic story because you look at the way families have one or two events that they go to every year, no matter what the economy looks like, and they just figure out a way to make it happen. And that's really interesting activity.
Part of the old theory that if you stimulate at the bottom up, the money will get spent. If you give a $200 stimulus check to someone who's a millionaire, they'll put it in the bank. But if you give it to a poor Indian on the reservation, he'll go out and spend it.
That's actually an interesting thing that I wanted to mention to you. Everybody knows, including you, because you were there, my little encounter with George Bush on sovereignty. Do you remember the second question I asked him?
No, I don't. Remind us. We may make you famous the second time around.
The second question is why are Republicans so insistent on income taxes rather than payroll taxes? They talk about let's cut income taxes, and some people don't pay income taxes. Yet everybody pays payroll tax, and it's much more profound because it's capped. If you make over 180,000, you don't pay anything beyond that, whereas someone on the reservation is paying a great deal of their income in payroll tax. President Obama is going to start this fight again, and the reason I brought it up is he wants to cut payroll taxes again, to extend the payroll tax cut. And this is a tax cut that is significant to Indian country. It matters to people on the reservation because it's weekly check money they'll see in their paycheck.
I think it puts something like $8 to $10 a week back into my paycheck. So it was immediate money in the expenditure. You're saying it's capped at $180,000 a year?
I think that's right. I'm just doing that off the top of my head, but roughly that.
Joe the plumber, even though he never made close to $250,000 a year in profit, is not going to be happy with that.
No, not indeed.
Because it's more taxes for someone, even though he's never going to probably achieve that particular status.
There's just this crazy preoccupation with the income tax, and I think they probably at some point ought to combine them. And the idea was that the payroll tax is the money you're putting into your Social Security or your Medicare. But we all know that's fiction now. There is no account for us out there somewhere. We're paying for people who are retired now, and that's fine. It's a tax.
Hurricane Irene, one of the best stimulus programs that Mother Earth has ever brought to our country. There's hundreds of bridges and roads that have to be rebuilt now. As much as disasters do this, don't they also do things on the other end as well?
Oh, sure. They require you to do spending for new things and infrastructure particularly. One part of that story that kind of Al Gore alluded to earlier in this week is that this is consistent with climate change, that storms will be more intense and more often. And whether it's Hurricane Irene or another hurricane or tornadoes in places where usually don't have tornadoes, that's all consistent with a changing climate.
Right, which I think everyone's got to be on the watch out for, even Indian country, because it means perhaps a change in crops. The kernels of corn on an ear don't grow as large as they used to, according to some statistical data coming off of the Shoshone Bannock reservation, I hear.
I have got a really great potato crop and a really great tomato crop, but my corn is perplexing. I have not figured out why it's very tall. It's about 7 and 8 feet tall, but for whatever reason, I haven't got good ears yet. I have my fingers crossed.
Are you experimenting with native seeds, or
I am.
by any chance on all those products?
Yes, about half the corn is blue corn from Navajo Nation, and the other is a yellow corn that also would be consistent with stews and stuff. And the potatoes are the blue potatoes.
Yep.
So yes, we've been experimenting with all that.
See a revival of gardening in the native community from Oneida to Lakudere to the Shoshone Bannock Reservation, and people replanting products that were healthy, clean, fighting the health issue, surviving. Is there depression on the reservation? People go, we're not sure if there is or not. Things look kind of like the more the same the longer they get. Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on what this guy does. We want to get back to you on the, what did you say, the organization up in Washington, D.C. that was doing the briefing at the BIA today.
Office of Management and Budget.
Okay, and we're going to hear a report about where those cuts they think they're going to come down and what they're going to be next week.
Right.
Sounds good, Mark. You have fun.
Okay, Paul.
And let me know when you're harvesting your corn. I'm going to come out there and try some of it out.
Sounds good.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of Native News Update. Come join us again soon.